My neighbor kept leaving notes on my door. I used to think the worst thing that could happen in my apartment was getting robbed. I was wrong. Because one night, I came home and found a handwritten note taped to my front door. It said, "Please stop pretending you don't remember me." The problem was I had absolutely no idea who it was talking about. At first, I thought it was just a prank. Maybe someone had the wrong apartment. So I threw the note away. I didn't think about it again. At least not until the next one appeared. 3 days later, I came home from work and found another piece of paper taped to my door. This time it said, "You can't keep hiding forever." I remember standing in the hallway for almost a full minute. I looked around. There was no one there. I checked the apartments across from mine. Nothing. I even asked the building manager if anyone had reported a problem. He said no, so I went back upstairs and tried to convince myself that it was just some stupid prank. But then, 1 week later, another note appeared. This one said, "You still sleep with the light on." And that was the moment I stopped thinking it was a joke, because I did sleep with the light on, and I had never told anyone. The next morning, I bought a small security camera and pointed it directly at my front door. I wanted to know who was doing this. For several days, nothing happened. I started to wonder if whoever was leaving the notes had stopped. Then, at exactly 2:13 in the morning, someone appeared on the camera. The person was wearing a dark hoodie. Their face was covered. They walked slowly toward my apartment. Then they stood outside my door. For almost 30 seconds, they didn't move. Finally, they placed a note on my door and walked away. I watched the footage over and over again, and then I noticed something. The person was limping. Not slightly. They were dragging one leg. I immediately started thinking about the people who lived in my building. There was an elderly man downstairs, a young couple across the hall, a college student upstairs, and a woman who lived in the apartment next to mine. Her name was Elena. I had seen her several times, and she walked with a noticeable limp. I was almost certain she was the person leaving the notes. The next morning, I knocked on her door. Nobody answered. I knocked again. Still nothing. But when I was about to walk away, I noticed that her door was slightly open. I pushed it, and immediately realized something was wrong. The apartment was completely empty. There was no furniture, no clothes, no dishes, nothing. It looked like nobody had lived there for months. I called the building manager, and that's when he told me something that made my stomach drop. Elena had moved out, 6 months earlier. I asked him how that was possible. I had seen her. I had seen her walking through the hallway. I had seen her near the elevator. I had even seen her standing outside her apartment. The manager looked at me like I was crazy. Then he told me that Elena had died 2 months after moving out. She had been involved in an accident. I didn't believe him. I thought there had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe there was another woman with the same name. Maybe he had the wrong person. But then he showed me an old photograph. It was Elena, the exact same woman I had seen. The same face, the same limp. I went back to my apartment completely terrified. But I still had one question. If Elena had been dead for months, who had been leaving the notes? That night, I decided not to sleep. I turned off every light in my apartment and sat in the living room. At exactly 2:13 in the morning, I heard something outside my door. A soft scratching sound, like someone slowly dragging a piece of paper across the surface. I walked toward the door. I looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Then I looked down. There was another note. I picked it up. And this time the message said, "You're finally starting to remember." I stared at those words for a long time. Remember what? I had never met Elena. At least, I thought I hadn't. The next morning I started searching through my old belongings. I looked through old photos, old messages, old emails, anything that could connect me to her. And then I found a photograph. I was standing next to a young girl. The girl looked familiar, but I couldn't remember her. I turned the photograph over. There was a date written on the back, and a name, Elena. I felt my stomach drop. I had known her. Not recently, years ago. We had been best friends when we were teenagers. But something had happened between us. Something terrible. And somehow, I had completely buried it. I started searching online, and eventually I found an old news article. It described a car accident. 2 teenage girls had been involved. One survived. The other suffered serious injuries. The name of the survivor was mine. The name of the other girl was Elena. I kept reading, and then I saw the part that made my hands start shaking. The accident had been caused by a hit-and-run driver. The driver was never found, but the article mentioned that Elena had been inside the car with another girl, me. I suddenly started remembering things. The rain, the sound of the tires, the argument, Elena screaming. And then I remembered the truth. I had been driving. I had lost control of the car. We crashed. Elena was seriously injured, and I survived. But afterward, I lied. I told everyone I had been sitting in the passenger seat. I said I didn't know who had been driving. The case was never solved. I moved away. I started a new life, and somehow I buried the entire memory. But now, the memories were coming back. I looked at the notes again. I realized that whoever was leaving them knew something about my past. Someone who knew Elena. Someone who knew the truth. I checked the camera footage again. This time I looked at every detail. The hoodie, the shoes, the way the person walked, and then I noticed something. A ring, a small silver ring with a black stone. I remembered that ring. Elena's older brother used to wear one exactly like it. That evening, I went downstairs and asked the building manager if he knew anyone connected to Elena. At first he said no, but I could tell he was lying. Eventually, he admitted that a man had been visiting the building for months. He never gave his name, but he always asked about me. The manager had assumed he was a relative. I asked him what the man looked like, and immediately I knew it was Elena's brother. I went back upstairs. When I reached my apartment, there was one final note waiting for me. It said, "You remembered." I turned around. At the end of the hallway stood a man wearing a dark hoodie and the silver ring. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he looked at me and said, "You told everyone you weren't driving." I couldn't answer. He continued, "She knew you were lying." I asked him, "Then why didn't you tell the police?" He looked at me and said, "Because she asked me not to." I didn't understand. "Why?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out an old voice recording. Then he played it. It was Elena's voice. She was crying, and she said, "If anything happens to me, don't let Maya blame herself." I felt like the air had left my body, because I finally understood. Elena had known I was driving, but she had never wanted me to be punished. I thought Elena's brother had been leaving the notes to scare me. I thought he wanted revenge, but that wasn't the truth. He had been trying to make me remember, because Elena had spent years protecting me from what had happened, and then her brother told me something I never expected. The notes hadn't been written by him. They had been written by Elena. He had found them in a box after she died. She had written them during the final years of her life. Not because she hated me, but because she wanted me to remember. The last note, the one that said, "You still sleep with the light on," had been written just days before she died, and suddenly I remembered why. After the accident, I had been terrified to sleep in the dark. I couldn't sleep alone. So Elena used to stay on the phone with me every night. She was the only person who knew. The person I had spent years trying to forget had actually been the person who knew me best. And even after everything that happened, she had still been trying to protect me. To this day, I still don't know whether Elena's brother was right to make me remember. Maybe I had the right to live without knowing the truth. Maybe he should have let the past stay buried. But I also know this. For years I thought forgetting something meant it was gone. It wasn't. Sometimes your mind doesn't erase the things that hurt you. It just hides them somewhere, until you're finally ready to remember.